Hey everyone, how you doing? Welcome back to Honest About the Irish. Notre Dame improves to 8-1 with a 34-6 victory over Navy. Gonna have a little bit of a quick recap of Saturday's game because there's a little bit of a rant that I want to get on towards Notre Dame fans about coming back down to reality, about possibly squeaking in at the number 4 spot in the college football playoff. So before we get into that, we will talk about the game. There's something interesting that really left me scratching my head. I didn't know about it, and I didn't really think about, because all we hear about is how hard it is to prepare against that triple option, how it's unpredictable, and it's a lot of tight tackling, and you have to play your P's and Q's very tight, and there's not a lot of space, and Navy can have the ball for about 8 minutes of drive and suffocate your defense, and Notre Dame goes on the field already trailing, and any team trailing by an early touchdown because of Navy's long drives. But there is a stat since 2018 that I noticed that I wrote down here on a note, so I remind myself to tell you guys, is that Notre Dame on defense since 2018 has prepared very well on against the triple option on defense. Since 2018, Notre Dame has not allowed no more than 3 points in the first half against Navy. In 2018, when that game was played out in San Diego, they only allowed 3 points in the first half. 2019, Notre Dame shut them out. And, of course, this year, Notre Dame in 2021 only allowed 3 points in that first half and only a field goal in the second half. So it seems like the last 3 years, Notre Dame's defense has prepared better against the Navy's triple option. So that is something bright to see, something that, a little optimistic to look forward to. And while you're probably thinking, well, it's only one game, why can't they tackle that against other teams? Because Notre Dame has struggled the last 12 15 years against Navy with their triple option. Every once in a while there's a little bit of a blowout or a dominant win by Notre Dame, but then again you get those close games where Notre Dame wins by a field goal or a touchdown, like in 2017 where Notre Dame had only won by a touchdown when they were favored to win by 3 scores or more. The last time Notre Dame lost to Navy was in 2016. 2016 was a brutal year for Notre Dame. That was Notre Dame's last losing season, I believe. Yes, it was actually. So another fact there for you guys to remember if you're ever asked that, when was Notre Dame's last losing season? Well, B-Man is mad says 2016. That was a awful year. Let's not remember 2016. So Kyron Williams, of course, had another great game. Kevin Austin Jr., one of my favorite receivers at Notre Dame, had that beautiful 70-yard touchdown pass. Had a career game with 6 receptions, 139 yards, and a touchdown. And Notre Dame had a total of 430 yards on offense, and Navy only mustered 184 yards of total offense. So Notre Dame continues to dominate over Navy. Notre Dame dominates that series since the 1940s. There is a little bit of mutual respect between Notre Dame and Navy. Back in the 1940s, when World War II broke out, a lot of campuses lost their enrollment because of the young men went in and fought in the war. So there was a possibility that Notre Dame could have shut down as a university since they were a private school. The Navy Academy agreed to try out recruits there to save the university. So since then, Notre Dame and Navy agreed to play each other because they helped each other out. So it is a very great sportsmanship, rivalry, and respect there. And every time Notre Dame does play against Navy every year, I always get nervous because of that triple option. And they are a very frustrating team that can, like I said, suffocate your defense and just knock the air out of your sails. And we've seen so many teams struggle against Navy. What worried me about this game was how poor Notre Dame's tackling had been since the Virginia Tech game. It seems like their defense had been getting progressively worse. Even the USC game, they weren't tackling really well. They couldn't tackle the quarterback at North Carolina. They couldn't even tackle the key receiver London and USC and Virginia Tech on that road game when it was back and forth. This poor tackling, a lot of missed tacklings, and that was really worrisome for me going into the week. Like, if Notre Dame can't tackle these players, they're going to have a really tough time against Navy in that triple option. And you know what? They proved me wrong. Their tackling was great. Like I said, they only allowed 184 yards of total offense, and they only allowed a field goal in the first half, and only allowed a field goal in the second half as well. Hence the score 34-6. So once again, Notre Dame proved me wrong on defense, and it's great to see Notre Dame continue that series and beat Navy. I don't hate Navy. I just hate how they cause fits for Notre Dame, and I am glad that game is out of the way, because Believe me, if Notre Dame would have lost to Navy after the way it had been tackling, first of all, I would have been right for one time in my life. And secondly, that would have been pretty much it for Notre Dame's season. Probably not able to play on a New Year's Day bowl game, not the college football playoff. We will get into that right now. There's a difference between a New Year's Day bowl game and the college football playoff. Okay, here's my rant. And not to sound like a jerk, not to sound like a pompous you-know-what, but there is something that Notre Dame fans, the unfortunate, delusional Notre Dame fans, and look, there's nothing wrong with being a fan, but there's a difference between being a realistic fan and an unrealistic fan. Now, I am a realistic, pessimistic, negative Notre Dame fan, but at least I speak my true opinion. And I'm not a fair weather fan. I cheer for this team no matter what. I criticize this team if they're 11-0 or 0-11. But there was something that I could not believe what I was hearing when I was at the North Carolina game, when I was sitting on my chair, drinking my beer. And you remember I had a mishap with the TV and forgetting some food and all that. But the Notre Dame fans behind me at the North Carolina game, this is when I first started hearing it, is that, we still have a chance. Now, I hate when fans say we. You know how I feel about that. Not we as fans, but like we as Notre Dame. I don't associate myself with Notre Dame, so I never try to say we with Notre Dame. But when these fans say, you know what, we still have a chance. First of all, no. Notre Dame does not have a chance to get in the playoffs, okay? If Notre Dame gets into the college football playoff at number 4, I will be very surprised. I believe they have a 2% chance to get in there. There are too many teams ahead of them. There are too many teams with better resumes than Notre Dame to get in there. And Notre Dame has no chance. No chance at all. Even if Notre Dame wins out the rest of their games and a couple of these teams lose and they have 2 losses like Ohio State or Oregon or even Cincinnati, I still don't think Notre Dame is going to get in. And I don't want to hear this, well, you know what, Alabama's not that good this year. Alabama looked really poor against LSU. If Notre Dame were able to sneak in at number 4 and maybe play Alabama or possibly Georgia, Notre Dame could have a chance. First of all, no, Notre Dame is not going to beat Alabama. We've been through this 100 times. I've seen Notre Dame play Alabama twice in 10 years. Notre Dame is not going to beat Alabama. Alabama would torch Notre Dame. I don't care how bad Alabama's secondary has been this year, how many points they've given up. They only mustered 6 yards of rushing against LSU this past weekend. That game was tough for Alabama. Still, they would blow Notre Dame out, folks. I hate to tell you. They are at a different level than Notre Dame, and for some reason, Nick Saban prepares better for these bowl games or playoff games than Brian Kelly does. And we've been through this before. Alabama would beat Notre Dame by at least 3 scores or more. Come down to earth, folks. Okay, and yes, I will say this about this week. A lot of these top teams played very lethargic, struggled. Ohio State struggled against Nebraska. Oregon struggled against Washington. Purdue took down Michigan State, which I already knew that was going to happen. That was predictable. Okay. And of course, I just alluded to the Alabama game against LSU. That game was atrocious. That was the worst I've seen Alabama play in a long time. Even with the couple of losses they've had over the few years, even the loss against Texas A&M, that was just a bad game to watch. I had not seen a Nick Saban team play that poorly in a long time. Even Cincinnati had a hard time playing against Tulsa this weekend. That was a late decided game. Tulsa had so many chances to get in there and possibly score a touchdown and go for 2 and tie that game. But even if Cincinnati would have lost that game, Notre Dame would not have a chance to get in the playoffs. There's too many scenarios that would not work in their favor. The only thing that would happen there was only 3 games left, that if every team ahead of Notre Dame lost the rest of their games and Notre Dame continued to win and Notre Dame got in there, or if, let's say, 6 teams ahead of them lost consecutively 3 games in a row, and one team continued to win, let's like Georgia, and it ended up being Notre Dame 1, Georgia 2, and Georgia ends up winning the SEC. Now, there's another scenario that Notre Dame could have had, possibly getting into the playoff if they had stayed in the ACC. Let's say that Notre Dame did play a non-conference game against Cincinnati, and they did lose that game early in the year, but they continued to win through the ACC because the ACC is poor this year. It is not good at all. Wake Forest in North Carolina, that game was like a basketball score, like 58-53, I believe it was. That was a crazy game. But let's say that Notre Dame was in the ACC for a second year, and they won the ACC again in the regular season and played the ACC championship and won, and it finished the year 12-1 and won the ACC championship and got in as a Power 5 conference at number 4, okay? That would be the only scenario Notre Dame could be in the playoffs, but being an independent and having that terrible game and that awful game they lost, not saying that Cincinnati's awful, but the way they played, that was Notre Dame's one of the worst games of the year. We have to be put down to reality and realize that even if Notre Dame wins the rest of their games, they are not getting in at a number 4 spot. I have to tell you folks, okay? The best case scenario for Notre Dame is that they play in the Citrus Bowl or a New Year's Day bowl game against an SEC team or possibly an ACC team. So, I mean, I hate to tell you guys, that's the only reality we have. And please bring yourself down from this dream that Notre Dame still has a chance to get number 4, because I do not want to see Notre Dame get blown out by a Georgia or an Alabama. We've seen this too many times. It's not going to happen. So Notre Dame also needs to worry about their next 3 games. Their next 3 games are, of course, out at Virginia, which Virginia is another high-scoring team like North Carolina, who had 2 weeks to prepare against Notre Dame. And, of course, Notre Dame's last home game, which is in a couple weeks, is against Georgia Tech, which Georgia Tech, their last 5 games, they have lost by a combined, I saw it said, they have lost by less than a touchdown in 3 of those games. Georgia Tech could easily be a winning team right now with 6 or 7 wins. So you got to be careful with Georgia Tech. They can play. So, and then, of course, you go out to Stanford at the end of the year, and that game could always be tricky. I don't care how poor Stanford is. Stanford did take out Oregon this year, earlier in the year. So, another team that's, another team that could possibly be in the college football playoff at the end if they continue to win out. That looks great for Stanford. But, I think that Notre Dame fans need to worry about the next 3 games before there's even a possibility, pipe dream of them being at the number 4 spot, because they could easily lose this weekend to Virginia or Georgia Tech or even Stanford. And they're not going to lose 3 in a row. I could see them winning 2 out of the next 3 games and going 10-2 for the rest of the year before they play their bowl game, possibly going 11-2, which would be a great season for Notre Dame. After the terrible beginning they had against, the Florida State, the way they had to pull out that one in Toledo, that terrible game against Cincinnati, their only loss of the season so far. But concentrate on your next 3 games, then worry about the 4th college football playoff spot, which I don't even think they'll get, even if let's say Notre Dame blows out Georgia Tech, Virginia, and Stanford. They only allow, let's say Notre Dame's defense somehow plays great like they did against Navy and only allows 17 points in the next 3 games total. I don't even think that scenario would help Notre Dame. I just think it's too late. They should have beaten Cincinnati in the beginning of the year, and that that would have been a top 10 win for Notre Dame, and they blew their chance. So I hate to say it, folks, but Notre Dame will most likely play in a New Year's Day bowl game, not a college football playoff, at number 4. That is pretty much it for today's show. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. I'll talk to you guys next week after the Virginia game, and as always, go Irish.